So this is Solomon, right? There's a time to be torn down. There's a time to weep. There's a time to hate. There's a time to be hurt. There's a time to throw away. And everything is made beautiful in its time. This is the wisest man who ever lived. This is what he came to a conclusion. That there's a time for all those bad things, and he still has the audacity to say, everything is made beautiful in its time. Do you believe that? Do those words sit well with you in your heart? You see, the other day, I had a long conversation with one of my best friends since high school. You see, he's reaching like a pinnacle in his life. He's about to graduate from a great college, but he's having a lot of trouble reconciling what he's been through. You see, a couple years before that, literally his life collapsed. His relationships collapsed. His girlfriend collapsed. His schooling collapsed. He literally failed out of school. And now he's back and he's graduating, he's succeeding, but he's like, I always feel no matter how far I am, I feel like I'm not where I should be. He feels like it's like I made such a big mistake I can never move past it. Do you feel like that sometimes? Do you feel like something you went through in your past is like time wasted, that time you'll never get back? And it's like no matter how far you go, that's always going to haunt you, and you're never going to be able to be where you should be? Oh man, those 2 years when I wasn't Christian, well, all throughout my teenhood, man, it's like so embarrassing looking back. Oh man, you know, I failed out of school. And now I'm here picking up the pieces several years later. And no matter how successful I get, that's always going to haunt me. Maybe it's your image. You see, back in the day, maybe you've been very overweight or you're very overweight now. And it's like all that time period, it's like you just can't get over that. You let that happen to yourself. But maybe that's you right now. See, maybe you're struggling with your faith. Maybe you're struggling in school. Maybe you're struggling in work right now. And you're looking at this time period and you say, I do not understand the purpose for me going through this right now. I don't see how this is going to be beautiful in its time. I don't understand, God, what you're doing or why you're letting this happen. If that's you, this message is for you today. Let's bow our heads and pray. 1 Samuel, I read through like 30 chapters in like 2 days. And I don't even have time. You can't put it down. You want to know what happens. And the story is about David we're talking about today. Okay? David grew up a shepherd. And not only a shepherd, he's taking care of sheep all day, stinky sheep. But he was the youngest brother with seven older brothers. So basically the sheep that he was spending his whole day with, day and night, pretty much none of them were guaranteed to him. There was no fruit in what he was doing. And he was just consistent, faithful, day by day. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes, this man of God, and he says, listen, David, you're going to be the next king of Israel. He's a nobody. He's a shepherd. He's like, wow, you know, that's amazing. But what's more amazing is what happens next. You see, the king at the time, Saul, was really sick. He was sick spiritually and physically. And he needed someone to come play the harp for him to calm him down. And randomly, one of his servants like, there's this guy, David. He's amazing on the harp. You should have him come play for you to calm him down. David, he just got prophesied over that he's going to be king. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he gets dragged into the king's palace to play for the king. And then the story continues to build from there. You see, this big giant guy challenged the whole Israelite army. And David's like, you cannot talk to my God like that. And he went and defeated this huge warrior. And then, you know what Saul said to the king? He said, you will now live with me. You're not going to be going back to your house. And if you read it in Samuel, it says he stayed at the palace. So first he gets prophesied over, and now it's like everything is just coming into order. It's like what God told him was going to happen was happening before his eyes. Smooth sailing. He's on his way to where the destination is supposed to go. And then even more good stuff happened. You see, he started getting in charge of a large amount of people. He was becoming a head of an army. And every time he got sent out, he was more and more successful. More and more people knew his name. Everyone was respecting him. He's like, man, I got prophesied to be king. And everything is coming true. Everything is coming into line. And then Saul tells him, you're going to marry my daughter. So not only is he in the kingdom, promised to be king, but now he was going to be a part of the king's family. But you see something? That is when his life collapsed. It's like God took him so far, and everything was coming into place, and then all of a sudden it just collapsed. You see? And everything was coming into place, and then all of a sudden it just collapsed. You see, what happened is one time he was there playing the harp like he used to do before he got all this fame and recognition. And Saul got so jealous. Something got over him, and he took a spear, and he tried to kill David. And not only once, and David avoided him, but he threw it twice. And David had to run for his life. But David had a best friend in Jonathan. That's the king's son. And in the Bible, it tells us that the king's son, Jonathan, even gave him his robe, gave him his sword, and he said, listen, I love you as I love myself. And he was the best friend he could have. And then Jonathan ran out to David after David escaped his dad. He said, listen, my dad's never going to kill you again, not try to kill you again. Come back, he made a mistake, don't worry about it, it's okay, you know? And David trusted him. He went back. He said, my life's coming into order. I'm going to be the next king. This has got to work out. It's going to calm down. But guess what? Saul, the king, got enraged again, tried to kill him, and this time he was serious. He was going to kill him when he went back to his wife's house. And she told him, you have to go. You have to run. Get out of here. He had to leave his best friend. He had to leave his promise that God was giving him. He had to leave his wife. He had to leave everything he knew and just run out there with no security, with no promise. He's just out there, running around. He was so scared he had to go to the enemy's territory, pretend to be drunk and mad and spitting all over himself so no one would recognize him. Can you imagine how he felt? I bet you he was so confused. Like, God, this makes absolutely no sense. You told me something was going to happen, and now look where I am now. I bet you he felt neglected and abandoned. He felt rejected by Saul. He felt rejected by everyone in the kingdom. He had to be a nobody. I bet you he felt rejected by God. I bet you he asked God, God, are you paying attention? This does not make sense. Did you sleep on the job? Are you leaving me out here to dry? What's going on, God? You see, in the pain that David was going through, it's amazing how he expresses what he's going through. If you want to look at Psalm 13, look at the struggle that David has. It says, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer me. Lord my God, give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. He was stuck wrestling with his thoughts. He was stuck with the sorrow weighing him down. But let's go back to us, guys. Anybody here know exactly how that feels? To feel like God must have not been paying attention? Like just confused on why he let that happen to you in the past? Or maybe right now you're struggling and you're like, God, are you not paying attention to my life anymore? Am I not who I was to you anymore? Are the things people spoke over me in the past never going to happen? Is that just all this talk? But what if I told you guys that that time period when David was running for his life, sleeping in caves, sleeping in the ground, struggling for food, constantly being betrayed by person after person, was the best times in his life? It was literally the most beautiful times in his life. That looking back, a lot of who he is today came from those time periods. What would you guys say? And what if I told you, just like Solomon said, there was a time in his life for those things. There was a time for him to be rejected. There was a time for him to feel abandoned. There was a time for the people he trusted to hurt him. And there was a time for him to feel like he was on his own. But in particular, guys, I want to point our eyes. It's snowing on me, by the way. You notice that? Okay, I'll get serious again. Ready? So there's 3 time periods in his life that I want you guys to really point to. And Noah Solomon named a lot of different things. And the first thing was, it was a time in his life for the relationships in his life to be tested. There was a lot of relationships being built up in that castle. First was Saul. He was like the king. He was going to be the next king. I bet you he looked up to him. He wanted to be like, that's going to be me. He wanted to learn everything he could from him. And he's the one trying to kill him. You see, sometimes in our lives, guys, when we go through the toughest times and our relationships are tested, it's the biggest blessing because the people who shouldn't be in your life are kicked out of your life. The toxic people in your life, you're aware that they're toxic. Maybe you had a bad relationship and you're looking back, you're just embarrassed. And you got hurt by them so bad. But if you're looking back at that time period, you could say, man, I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about who I want as my spouse, who I should date, what I should respect myself, how I should love myself, how I should never let someone else take advantage of me. You learned all those things through that time period in your past. And that's something that will stick with you and mold you and go with you forward. The second relationship that was tested was his friendship with Jonathan. Like I said, Jonathan said he loves him as himself. He made an oath to him. Jonathan should have hated David. You see, it was his kingdom. He was next in line. When Saul went down, Jonathan was going to be king. But Jonathan said, no, I love you like myself. If you become king, it's like me becoming king. And he took off his robe, he took off his belt, took off his sword to show him that, listen, when you become successful, it's like my heart becoming successful. You see, and I'm going to talk more about friendship, but I'm not going to do it because next series, guys, I have one of my best friends from Syracuse. He's an amazing young adult pastor. They're starting a ministry where they're getting like 300 kids our age who've never heard about Jesus in like a concert hall and throwing church in a club, and a lot of people are getting saved. So I'm telling you, if you guys want to come to hear about, and I challenge you guys what friendships really are. Are you really relying on your friends the way the Bible tells us to rely on our friends? Are you using your friends the way you're supposed to be using them? And are you developing friendships like you should be? Well, we wrestle with that come next week, okay? That's like a commercial. It's pretty good. All right? The third relationship to be tested, and it's the most important, valuable relationship. It's the relationship that defines your life, as his relationship with God. You see, when we go through tough times, there's a real beauty in going through those tough times because you are forced. You have no chance, no choice. You have to evaluate your relationship with God. You've got to ask yourself, who is God to me in this tough time? Is God just a genie? Is he just someone supposed to do good things for me? Or is God someone out there having a personal relationship with me, fighting alongside with me? And I want to tell you guys a story about a man named Hien Pham. I can't speak. Anyone speak Vietnamese? No. All right? Anyone ever heard of Ravi Zacharias? Yeah. Ravi Zacharias is one of the most brilliant men I've ever heard speak. He's got like 2 doctorate degrees. He graduated from Oxford University, and he goes like Johns Hopkins, he goes to Harvard, he goes to Princeton, and he goes there and just talks about religion, and he asks anyone from the crowd, all these really smart people, ask me anything you want about the Bible, and he'll answer it for them. But see, 20 years ago in his past, he did a missions trip to Vietnam. And Vietnam was a scary place, okay, back then, and it was a communist place. So it's like very against the rules to go speak about religion. But he did it, and there's a 21-year-old, I picture him like Michael. This guy's, he's the man, all right? This kid was on fire for God, and he was his translator. So it started off very small, like 20 people, and each night this 21-year-old kid would come with him and translate what he was preaching. And he said one night as it grew and it was a massive crowd, one night the Vietnamese kid got so excited that he started preaching. He took over, and Ravi Zacharias sat down and let the guy preach. And several, like 10s and 20s people got saved that night. But 20 years later, one day Ravi Zacharias gets a phone call, right? He gets this call, and he picks up, and he goes, Brother Ravi? And he goes, as soon as I heard that name, he goes, I knew exactly who it was. And he said, my heart was heavy. I said, man, you got to tell me how you've been. What's been going on in your life? How are you? And you know what he told him? He said, you won't believe what happened to me when you left that trip. You see, he made a lot of noise in that trip, and he was living in Vietnam. The communists arrested him and put him in a communist prison. Every morning at the crack of dawn, he was forced to do slave labor. He was forced to brutally just work all day, sweat all night. And he was also force-fed communist stuff. He could not read anything in English. He could not read the Bible. He couldn't talk about God. He was forced communist things. And he endured it, and he endured it, and he endured it, day after day. But a year and a half into this, one night he said, God, I can't take this anymore. He said, you must not be here for me. And he abandoned his faith. He said, I'm never going to pray to you again. This is the first day I'm not going to pray to you. The next day, his job assignment comes, and the first time ever, he goes, you're going to the bathroom. You're going to clean the bathroom. And he's like, man, like, how could this get any worse? He said, you walk 10 feet from the bathroom, it smells so bad you want to vomit. And your eyes are watering, you can't even go in there. But as he was cleaning the bathroom, he had to empty out the trash cans. And he saw English writing on a piece of paper with a bunch of fecal excrement all over it. But it was the first time he saw English writing in a year and a half. He got so excited, he washed it, he dried it right away with no one looking. He put it in his pocket. And he went home, back to his jail cell that night. In the middle of the night when no one else was there, he pulled out his flashlight. And what it was, it said Romans 8. And as he read Romans 8, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. And as he scrolled down the page, he read Romans 8:28. It says, in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. As he read that, tears streamed down his face. And then he went down further down the page, and it said, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? to show trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword. It says, no. In all these things we are more than a conqueror through him who loved us. It says, neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor demons, nor the present, nor the future, nor any powers, nor height, nor depth, or anything in all creation can separate us from the love of God that comes through Jesus Christ. He broke down in tears and he realized God would not let go of him even for one whole day. And he came back to God that night. But going back to David, as David was out on that road, David himself had to learn that same lesson. You see, when he was out there on his own and he felt all alone, he learned that even when he's in caves, even when he's sleeping on the ground, even when he feels all alone, that God was there with him. When everything seemed like chaos, complete chaos, and he was running and hiding and running and hiding, he saw God to be in perfect control. Several times, God totally protected him and guided him and led him out of situations. Several times, he got to walk in the middle of the king's whole army, unwaking up anyone, go inside of the tent and be face to face with Saul. And he learned no matter where he was or what he was going through, God would never, ever, ever let go of him. Once you are in God's hand, no one can take you from his hand. And this, I mentioned a psalm when he was down. This is another psalm he wrote. And I feel like this is the lesson he learned. It says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I'm up in the heavens, you are there. If I'm down in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn and settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Even if darkness will come all around and light becomes night around me, it says, even the darkness will not be night to you. You see, guys, the beauty in that struggle and that time period was the journey and the development that he had. But there was another thing that got tested in that time period, and there was a certain time. And it was a time for his character to be tested. Going back to Hian Pham, I told you guys at the beginning of the story, but there's even more to the story. You see, that night after he got saved again, he recommitted his life to Christ. The next day, he volunteered to go to the bathroom. Because what he soon found out was the prison guard got handed a missionary New Testament Bible, and he was using it as toilet paper. So over the next week, he collected the whole Romans and some parts of the New Testament to read in himself. He got released several months later, and he decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build a boat with 30 to 40 people, and I'm going to escape this miserable place. He got 30 to 40 people. They built the whole boat. They were ready to go. And 2 days before they were going to leave, knock, knock, knock. Police officers come in the door, shake him, they throw him against the wall. They said, tell me the truth. Are you planning to leave this country? Tell us what your plans are. And he swore on everything he knew. I am not leaving. I don't know. He felt like he abandoned God. He felt like his character just totally failed. And he said, God, if they come again, no matter what the consequences are, I'm going to tell them that I'm leaving. And guess what happened? Next day, knock, knock, knock. Police officers come, throw him against the wall. Are you planning to leave? And he answered them, I don't care what control you have over me. I don't care if you're going to throw me in prison. I am leaving this country. I'm planning. I have a boat. I have 30 people to come with me. And the police officers looked at him and said, good, because we're coming with you. 30 to 40 police officers came on that boat with him the next day. And you know what happened? A storm came that they never expected. And they would have definitely been shipwrecked and drowned and dead. But those 30 police officers that came with them were professional salesmen. They knew how to go on the water like crazy. God delivered him through his character testing. And that's what I want to tell you guys is David and this journey, one of the most beautiful things about this journey is David's character was constantly tested. You see, several times he could take his fate in his own hand. God delivered him in the middle of the tent with Saul sound asleep with a spear next to Saul. He could have easily killed him, had his whole disaster over with, and taken over the kingdom. But he said, no, I'm not going to compromise my character. The Lord, my God, will vindicate me. And what I want to challenge each one of you guys today is when you go through those tough times, even if you're going through those tough times right now, it's a test of your character. In 1 Peter chapter 4, it says, do not be surprised at this fiery ordeal that has come on to test you. It has come on to test you. And then it goes on further and says, how are you going to spend your time when you're suffering? Are you going to spend it as a murderer? Are you going to spend it as a liar? Are you going to spend it sinning and going out and doing the easy thing? Or are you going to withstand the test? It's a test, guys. Okay? Next thing you have to realize, intermission. It's a test for your character because of Romans 5. It says, not only so, but we also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope. Every time you're faced with another challenge, guys, when you're right now or back in your past, you have to realize that it was building your character. Because every challenge that you surmounted, you get a little more perseverance. Because next time that comes, you can walk through it. I can do this. And after you get a little more perseverance, you start to build this character, this strong sense of, I can do this with God and I can keep moving forward. All right, so I got to wrap this up. We're going to go next. The third thing that got tested, it was a time for his strength to be tested. A lot of times, guys, when we're going through a challenge, we look at ourselves like, how can I get myself out of this challenge? Am I strong enough to do this? Whether it's a test that you guys have in school, whether it's a relationship drama, you're like, am I strong enough to surmount this? And I'm going to tell you guys, everyone's like, oh, God will never give you more than you can handle. And I can tell you guys, a lot of times in your life, you will get way more than you can handle. Because Jesus gives us strength. Philippians 4:13. We can do all things. Everyone says that. It says through Christ who gives us strength. When we're weak and we're worn down, God is going to be there to strengthen us. He's an unending source of strength when you're down and you're weak. So if you're down there right now, you have to realize that you have a source of strength in Jesus. And this beautiful time period when you're struggling is beautiful because you're learning to develop and trust on God's strength. Can we have the worship team come up? If you're sitting here today and maybe you're going through a struggle and you're wondering, how can I, when I'm struggling, find the beauty in what's going on? How can I find the beauty in the times that I'm hurt? How can I find the beauty in the times I feel rejected? How can I find the beauty in when it's confusion and chaos and I don't know how I'm going to make it past? And there's two ways. The first way is God's promise that he who began a good work in you will complete it. Wherever you are, but just like David and everything collapsed, God is not going to leave you to a mountaintop to fall down to the ground. God will complete what he started. And the second thing I want to tell you guys is in Romans 8:28. It says, in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. I want to remind you, the bad things that happen, the bad things that are happening right now, God did not cause them. But he promises you guys, if you give it to him, he will use it and do something wonderful for you. He will use it and develop your character. He will use it and develop your strength. He will use it and he will sharpen your relationships and guide your relationships. So in closing today, I just want to read the passage that we started with today in Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 through 8. Because there's a time for everything, guys, and a season for every activity under the heavens. There's a time to be born and a time to die. There's a time to plant and a time to uproot. There's a time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. I want to challenge everyone here tonight to find the beauty